The Young and the Restless, spoilers full. There are returns in Genoa City that feel like nostalgia, like unfinished stories coming back for closure. And then there are returns that feel like a warning, a signal that something deeply unstable has been set loose again. And Patty Williams' reappearance belongs entirely to the second kind because her presence never simply adds drama, it distorts reality itself, pulling every character into a version of events where truth becomes negotiable and perception becomes the most dangerous weapon of all. And from the very moment her return was announced, there was an unspoken understanding that whatever followed would not be contained, that it would bleed into every relationship it touched, especially Jack's fragile, already strained marriage to Diane. Patty's release from the psychiatric facility was framed as progress, as recovery, as a step toward reintegration into a world she had long been separated from. But there is something deeply unsettling about how quickly that narrative collapses once she re-enters the orbit of Jack, because her fixation has not disappeared. It has simply evolved, reshaped into something that feels more controlled on the surface, but no less obsessive beneath. And the super yacht incident becomes the perfect stage for that transformation, a confined, high-pressure environment where identities blur, where manipulation thrives, and where Jack, already vulnerable due to Victor's calculated kidnapping scheme, becomes the ideal target for Patty's emotional projection. I know this is just a TV show, but I will never understand how even-keeled these people are when those they can't stand come around them. Today, that entire exchange between Diane and Patty just wouldn't have worked for me. I think differently and would have written that whole scene differently. Like if I were Diane, I'd have told Patty, get out of my face before I knock you out of it. People are too nice these days, too afraid to get in trouble or worried about someone's feelings. No, another thing, I would have told her that Jack and I are fine, your scheme didn't work, and walked away. Sure, I'd have been lying through my teeth, but I wouldn't have given Patty the satisfaction of thinking she ruined my marriage. But alas, this is a show, and it has the most unimaginative writer on all of television, JG, writing it. Victor's plan, as always, was rooted in control, a ruthless attempt to regain power over Newman Enterprises by destabilizing those who stood in his way. And in many ways, the yacht was less a prison and more a chessboard, each person placed strategically to serve a larger objective. But what Victor may have underestimated is the unpredictable variable that Patty represents. Because while he thrives on calculated moves, Patty operates on emotional impulses that cannot be easily predicted or contained. And in that confined space, her proximity to Jack becomes not just an opportunity, but an inevitability, a convergence of circumstances that leads to a moment neither of them will fully understand, yet both will be forced to live with. Jack's memory of that night is fragmented, incomplete, and that lack of clarity becomes one of the most devastating aspects of the situation because it strips him of the ability to defend himself with certainty, leaving him trapped between guilt and confusion, unsure of what he is responsible for and what may have been manipulated. And this ambiguity is where the story gains its most powerful tension because it forces both the characters and the audience to question what truly happened and, more importantly, whether it even matters in the face of how it is perceived by others. It is kind of strange that they brought Patty back to destroy Jack's marriage and she just walks away as unexpectedly as she appeared. She isn't going to suffer any consequences for what happened with Jack, just like Kane suffered no consequences for the 3 deaths in Nice. Kane Holden, Matt Sienna, a dash of Damien, and a pinch of Patty. Mix this list of old, new, and back from the dead ingredients in with some totally far-fetched and retread storylines, and you've got JG's personal recipe for stinky, spoiled sauerkraut. When Diane, Billy, and Kyle arrive and discover Jack in that compromising situation, the visual impact alone is enough to override any explanation that might follow, because in moments like that, context becomes irrelevant, replaced by instinct. by emotion, by the immediate sense of betrayal that defines the reaction, and Diane's perspective in particular becomes central to the unfolding conflict because she is not just witnessing an event, she is interpreting it through the lens of every insecurity, every doubt, every unresolved issue in her relationship with Jack. And in that instant, the damage is done regardless of the truth. You mean, Patty, but I think Jack is head over heels for Diane and something's off. Just because she drug his drink or food doesn't mean it wasn't in her lipstick or something. But who knows, with this AI storyline, kidnappings, Matt stalking, everybody named Newman and Nick, totally unnecessary drug addiction nonsense. I can't keep up. What makes this storyline particularly compelling is how it refuses to offer easy answers. Because while it would be convenient to frame Jack as either completely innocent or entirely at fault, the reality exists in a much more uncomfortable space, one where his lack of memory does not absolve him, but also does not fully condemn him. And Patty's role in shaping that reality adds another layer of complexity because her version of events is driven by a belief that what happened was meaningful, even transformative, and that belief, whether accurate or not, has the power to influence how others perceive the situation, especially if she chooses to assert it with conviction. From my perspective, this ambiguity is one of the strongest elements of the storyline because it mirrors real emotional conflicts where truth is often less important than perception and where the inability to prove or disprove something can be just as damaging as the act itself. And Jack's struggle to reconcile his own uncertainty with the expectations of those around him creates a tension that feels both authentic and deeply uncomfortable, because it highlights how fragile trust can be when it is confronted with something that cannot be easily explained. Patty, meanwhile, becomes increasingly emboldened by the situation because in her mind, this is not a scandal. It is validation proof that her connection to Jack is real and undeniable, and her sudden disappearance only intensifies that perception, transforming her into an almost mythic presence within the narrative. Someone who lingers even in absence, whose actions continue to ripple outward long after she is physically gone, and this unpredictability is what makes her so dangerous, because she does not need to be present to influence events. Her impact is already embedded in the relationships she has disrupted. Diane's anger, however, is anything but abstract. It is immediate, visceral, and deeply personal. And the more Jack struggles to provide clarity, the more her frustration grows because from her perspective, the lack of answers feels like evasion, like an attempt to minimize something that has already caused significant damage. And this is where the marriage begins to fracture in a way that may not be easily repaired, because trust, once shaken by uncertainty, becomes difficult to rebuild, especially when the truth remains elusive. Kyle's role in this dynamic adds another layer of emotional complexity because he is caught between his loyalty to his father and his desire to support his mother, and his attempts to navigate that space reflect a hope that the situation can still be resolved, that communication can bridge the gap that has formed, but there is also a growing awareness that some damage cannot be undone simply by understanding that some moments leave a lasting imprint that reshapes relationships in ways that cannot be reversed. Billy, observing from his own position of unresolved anger and instability, becomes both a witness and a participant in the broader emotional fallout because his perspective is shaped by his own conflicts, his own inability to reconcile his past with his present, and this influences how he interprets Jack's situation, adding another layer of tension to an already volatile environment because in Genoa City, personal struggles rarely remain isolated. They intersect, overlap, and amplify each other, creating a network of conflict that extends far beyond any single storyline. As everything continues to unfold, the central question is no longer what exactly happened on that yacht, but what it means for everyone involved, how it reshapes their perceptions, their relationships, and their sense of self. And perhaps the most haunting aspect of all is the realization that even if the truth were to be fully revealed, it might not be enough to repair the damage, because in the end, it is not just about what happened, but about what people believe happened. And in a world where belief often carries more weight than fact, that distinction becomes the most dangerous element of all. There are moments in Genoa City when the damage has already been done long before anyone realizes it, when the aftermath lingers heavier than the act itself, and what is left behind is not chaos in the traditional sense, but something quieter, more corrosive, a fracture that spreads slowly through every relationship it touches. And what Patty has done to Jack's life feels exactly like that kind of destruction, the kind that does not need her presence to continue unfolding, because her impact has already embedded itself deep within the emotional core of his marriage. And even though she has been pushed out, removed, dismissed as a problem that has been handled, there is a growing sense that nothing has truly been resolved, only delayed. On the surface, Patty's exit offers a fragile illusion of relief, especially for Diane, who can finally breathe without the immediate threat of that unpredictable presence hovering over her life. But relief is not the same as healing, and that distinction becomes painfully clear as Diane is forced to confront what remains the image. She cannot erase the doubt. She cannot silence, and the realization that even in Patty's absence, her influence has not disappeared, because what Diane is struggling with is not Patty herself, but what Patty represents, a moment where trust was broken, whether intentionally or not, and the fact that Jack cannot fully explain what happened only deepens that wound. Diane's internal conflict is where the story gains its most emotional weight, because she is caught between two opposing instincts: the desire to believe in Jack, to preserve the life they have built together, and the equally powerful urge to protect herself from further pain. And these instincts do not coexist peacefully. They collide, creating a tension that makes every interaction with Jack feel charged, uncertain, and fragile. And from a narrative standpoint, this is where the story becomes particularly effective, because it does not rely on dramatic outbursts to convey the depth of Diane's anger, but instead allows it to simmer beneath the surface, manifesting in hesitation, in distance, in the subtle withdrawal that often signals a deeper fracture than any confrontation could reveal. Jack, meanwhile, is left to navigate the consequences of something he cannot fully remember, and that lack of clarity becomes his greatest weakness, because it prevents him from offering the kind of reassurance Diane needs, and this creates a cycle of frustration that feeds into itself, because the more he insists that it meant nothing, the more it sounds like an excuse, and the more Diane questions his sincerity. And what makes this particularly tragic is that Jack is not necessarily lying, but his inability to provide certainty undermines whatever truth he does have, leaving him in a position where every attempt to fix the situation only seems to make it worse. From my perspective, this is one of the most compelling aspects of the storyline, because it highlights how fragile relationships can be when they are tested by uncertainty rather than clear betrayal. And while it would be easier for both characters if there were definitive answers, the ambiguity forces them to confront something much more difficult: the limits of their trust, and whether that trust can survive in the absence of clarity. And in many ways, this feels more realistic and more emotionally resonant than a straightforward conflict, because it mirrors the kind of doubt that can quietly erode even the strongest bonds. The possibility of Patty's return adds an entirely different layer of tension, because it transforms the current situation from a contained crisis into an ongoing threat. And in the world of Genoa City, characters like Patty rarely disappear permanently. They linger, they reemerge, often at the worst possible moment. And the idea that she could come back, perhaps even bringing Paul into the story, suggests that this is far from over, that what Jack and Diane are dealing with now may only be the beginning of something far more complicated. And this anticipation creates a sense of unease that extends beyond the immediate conflict, because it implies that any progress they make could be undone in an instant. If Patty does return, the implications are both fascinating and deeply unsettling, because her presence would force Jack to confront not just the consequences of the past, but the possibility of future entanglement. And this raises a question that sits at the heart of the storyline, whether Jack truly sees Patty as a mistake, or whether there is a part of him that is drawn to the intensity she brings. And while he would likely deny it, the fact that the situation occurred at all suggests that there is something unresolved within him, something that Patty is able to tap into in a way that others cannot. And this ambiguity is what makes the potential for further interaction between them so compelling, because it is not just about external conflict, but about internal vulnerability. At the same time, the idea that Jack might have to fight to win Diane back introduces a different kind of tension, one that shifts the focus from defense to pursuit, and this could create a dynamic where Jack is no longer trying to explain himself, but actively trying to prove his commitment. And from a storytelling perspective, this could either strengthen their relationship or push it to a breaking point, depending on how Diane responds. Because forgiveness is not simply a matter of effort, it is a matter of belief. And if Diane cannot truly believe in Jack again, then no amount of effort will be enough. There is also something inherently ironic in how Patty's role in all of this may have been both deliberate and incidental, because while it is tempting to view her actions as part of a larger scheme to disrupt Jack's life, there is also a sense that she may simply be acting according to her own emotional logic without fully considering the broader consequences, and that unpredictability is what makes her such a powerful force within the narrative, because she does not operate according to the same rules as everyone else, and that makes her both dangerous and difficult to counter. As the story continues to unfold, the tension lies not in whether Patty will return, but in how the characters will respond if she does, because by that point the damage will already have taken root, and any new development will build on an already unstable foundation. And perhaps the most compelling question of all is not whether Jack and Diane can survive this, but whether they even recognize the extent of what they are up against. Because sometimes the most destructive forces are not the ones that arrive with chaos, but the ones that quietly reshape everything before anyone has the chance to stop them.